contemplating the cosmos, wondering about who or what might be out there, about our own place in the universe, is what my next guest does for a living. If you ask the average scientist or academic about UFOs, UAP, they'll likely tell you there's nothing to it. There's no evidence. There's nothing to analyze. It's not worth their time. It's all a bunch of nonsense stories told by rubes and knuckleheads and grifters. Or they might make some kind of a joke like, I'll believe it when an alien invites me to dinner, as one prominent astrophysicist recently chuckled. Or I'll believe it when someone shows me a cigarette lighter taken from a flying saucer. You know, for decades, the threat of ridicule has been all too real for scientists who might privately have an actual genuine interest in UFOs and the decades of sightings, including credible cases documented by the U.S. military using various sensors. It takes courage. It takes real courage for a mainstream scientist to publicly admit that they are interested in studying and investigating the UFO UAP mystery. The negative feedback from colleagues, maybe from their employers, their universities, is pretty much a given. For a scientific superstar to step forward and announce their interest in the subject, to lead the charge, to actually challenge debunkers and defend the legitimacy of this kind of an inquiry, that takes guts, because such a scientist is putting everything on the line, their credibility, their reputation, their funding, maybe their jobs. My next guest has emerged as the top of the heap, the most credentialed, most respected scientific voice in the world on the UFO question. He's a highly respected astronomer who just happens to work for perhaps the top university in the world, Harvard. Dr. Avi Loeb joins me next, and we're really excited to talk about his new masterpiece, Interstellar. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Avi Loeb is the Frank Baird Jr. Professor of Science at Harvard University, chairman of Harvard's Department of Astronomy, founding director of Harvard's Black Hole Initiative, and director of the Institute for Theory and Computation within the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, as well as chair of the Board on Physics and Astronomy of the National Academies. He's the author of 4 books, over 700 scientific papers. In 2012, Time magazine selected Avi Loeb as one of the 25 most influential people in space. I can tell you he's a man of courage and integrity, whose new book, Interstellar, is a must-read for anyone interested in the UFO UAP mystery. Dr. Loeb, welcome back to Coast.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
You know, since you jumped into this topic some years ago, have you had a moment where you ever had to ask yourself, gosh, was this a good idea? Maybe I made the wrong decision.
No, I don't think so. And the other way around, the more I go into it, the better it looks, in the sense of, you have people on both sides that are not interested in collecting evidence. They include the believers who just say they believe in it. And the skeptics, some of my colleagues in academia, who are very negative, they ridicule the subject, but at the same time, they're not willing to invest any time in searching for the evidence. So what I discovered is that common sense is not common. And I established the Galileo Project at Harvard University. We have an observatory that is operating 24/7, collecting data. We are now testing all the components of it. The data goes to our computer system and then analyzed by machine learning software. Now, 2.5 years ago, I heard Bill Nelson at NASA talk about the subject after the Director of National Intelligence delivered the report to Congress. And Bill said that as a senator, he saw some classified data and the hair in the back of his neck stood up. And so he believes that scientists should get engaged. So the following morning, I sent an email to the person under him responsible for science, Thomas Zurbuchen. And within half an hour, he called me back and asked me to send a white paper. I sent a white paper suggesting more research. I said, I'm happy to make your boss happy, and I never heard back from them. And as a result, I established the Galileo Project that is doing exactly that. So they, a year later, established the study that just reported last week their findings. And as you can tell from the way the study was conducted, first of all, they ended up recommending what we are already doing. Maybe the good thing is that they acknowledge the need to do scientific research on unidentified anomalous phenomena. But at the end, they appointed the director who, has no scientific credentials. This is a person who was just a liaison to the Department of Defense. So we're back to square one. Instead of investing funds in more research on this, they went in a bureaucratic direction of basically allowing the Pentagon to lead the way. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office that was established there as a result of the report from the Director of National Intelligence. So if you wait for the government to do the right thing, you might wait forever. I mean, they have perhaps classified data that is quite intriguing, but they will not release it because it was collected by classified censors. So I decided to take this to our hands, and the sky is not classified, the oceans are not classified, and the Galileo Project is just studying it the scientific way. And of course, the negative is that lots of people in academia push back, ridicule it. Not only that they are not engaged, so you might say, okay, well, don't engage, but why ridicule it? I mean, that sounds to me like counter to the scientific method. We are all trying to understand, if there are anomalies, let's figure them out. What's the problem of just using instruments to figure it out? Those people who are ridiculing or expressing negative sentiments, they're not doing anything. I mean, they're taking the easy route and just saying bad things about it. And to me, that sounds counter-scientific. So to answer your question, I don't regret it for a minute. It may take some time. If the government has data that they would declassify, of course, that would help the case. But irrespective, I'm doing my work, and we just came back from the Pacific Ocean a few months ago, and I released the findings a few weeks ago. And if you want, we can discuss them as well.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Actually, it's quite a thrill to go in a path that was not taken. There is this poem by Robert Frost of taking the road not taken. And, of course, it makes all the difference because you are discovering new things. But there is also the chance that there is some low-hanging fruit because nobody took this path. I mean, the SETI community was looking for radio signals for 70 years, and they are one of the most vocal opponents to the kind of research I'm doing. They're calling me names, and they're trying to push back, and I just don't understand it because they are after searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. Why would they oppose to searching for objects in our backyard? Like, that is a different method than listening for radio signals is just like waiting for a phone call. It's a completely different approach than going out to the backyard and checking your mailbox if there are any packages. And yet they are not, you wouldn't believe it, they organize talks against the kind of work I'm doing. They don't allow any discussion of this topic in their conferences. And once again, this looks completely unnatural to me.
It's completely opposed to what we all think science should be and what scientists could do. I really enjoy following along as you take them on. The people who try to ridicule this, not only do they not want to investigate it themselves, they don't want you investigating it either, which is completely contrary to what you think the mission of science could be. I don't understand why they're just not curious. How can you don't have to base your whole career on it if they don't like it, but how can they not be curious about the biggest questions of human existence?
Yes, in fact, in 2 weeks, there will be a play presented that was written by a playwright, George Knapp, about my research. And the hope is that within a year it will show in New York City off-Broadway. And one of the lines in the play, I was just in the rehearsal yesterday, one of the lines says, why is childlike bullying so much more prevalent than childlike curiosity? That is the fundamental question. People enjoy bullying much more than being curious. And you would expect scientists to be exactly the opposite, because the whole point about science is to discover new knowledge. And how can you find new knowledge if you are always attached to past knowledge, which is pretty much what they are doing? If there are anomalies, things that we don't understand, we better figure them out. What is the worst thing that can happen? That we will find that, okay, these objects in the sky are just balloons and drones and airplanes, or things that are manufactured by the Chinese or the Russians. Okay, so in that case, the intelligence agencies will benefit knowing that. But it's not a bad thing for scientists to help, the government or national security. It's actually a positive thing. And I'm not interested in anything made in China at all. To me, it's boring. I would deliver this data to whoever wants it in Washington, D.C. And if we see birds, there are zoologists interested in them. So I'm happy to deliver them the data. I don't see any cost in terms of, the results that we might obtain. And if we find 1 out of 1,000 objects to be of extraterrestrial origin, of course, that would be a huge discovery of great importance to the future of humanity. So what's the problem in looking? I think it's really unfortunate that currently in academia the situation is like that. And
I don't understand what happened to Bill Nelson. He was a former astronaut, a U.S. senator. As you said, he made some dramatic statements after having these briefings behind closed doors. And then he made them as director of NASA, thinking, hey, NASA's the right place to do this. We're going to get to the bottom of this. And then he flipped the switch or something last week saying, most of this is explainable. It's not a big deal. We're dealing with a lot of UFO kooks, and really walked it back. And then NASA makes this announcement. All right, we're gonna have nothing but transparency. And then they won't even tell us the name of the guy who's heading their new program. It was crazy. Were you surprised by the change in attitude? We won't dwell on NASA too long, but were you surprised by the apparent change of attitude based on what Bill Nelson and others at NASA have said in the past?
Well, I think it looks as if they connected with AARO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office in the Pentagon, and as a result, they basically represent the scientific branch of whatever AARO is doing. If they have data of interest, they'll deliver it to AARO. And it looks as if they see it from a national security perspective, not from a scientific perspective. So they just want basically to check if there is espionage. The balloon, the Chinese-made balloon that was shut down is an example. And Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of AARO, said that only a few percent of the objects they look at are not fully understood. So, it's possible that AARO came to the realization that 97% of the objects are human-made. Therefore, it's a matter of national security. That's a reasonable decision for a government employee to make. If 97% of the objects are human-made and some are not made in the U.S., you just want your hands on these and to make sure that you protect the nation. And then NASA is used as a tool to collect more data because they have access to satellites and other instruments that collect data all the time. So as a result, the two organizations spoke and said, okay, it's a matter of national security. We want to deal with it that way. And of course, that's not driven by curiosity about extraterrestrial objects visiting us, which is the scientific approach to consider it. And so I think they basically are completely tilted in that direction. Now, of course, in the process of looking at objects, they might see something unusual, but if they're interested in national security and has nothing to do with adversaries, they will just leave it off the table. I, on the other hand, I'm exactly interested in the opposite. Even if one object in 1,000 is very strange, I want to know about it because we're talking about something that will inform us about neighbors in our cosmic environment, and that's, of course, of great scientific significance. So I think, once again, we cannot rely on the government to be transparent, to follow curiosity. Taking the matter to our own hands is the right approach, and it may well be that the expedition to the Pacific Ocean, going to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, allows us to learn more about interstellar space than waiting for politicians in Washington, D.C. to tell us.
Yes, we're going to get into talking about that expedition. One more question about the feedback that you've received so far. I was just asking you about whether you had second thoughts because Dr. John Mack, the late Dr. Mack, was at Harvard Medical School, was a friend of mine. I had interviewed him many times and had many conversations with him. Harvard went after him. Harvard tried to take away his tenure. I'm hopeful that they are supportive of you, or at least not getting in your way. Is everything okay on that end?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I get a lot of support on the expedition. I'm collaborating with Stein Jacobs in a different department, the Earth and Planetary Science Department. Of course, there are people expressing their opinion, but that's not an issue. There is something very different between what John Mack did and what I do. He was interested in human psychology and was speaking with people who claimed they were abducted. And,
right.
I'm approaching it from a physicist point of view. So, you can't rely, when you do physics, you can't rely on humans as detectors because, you look at a car accident and people involved give you very different reports. You look at the FIFA World Cup, the Women's Soccer World Cup this year, and the difficult decisions were reached after getting data from video cameras, not from the players in the field,
right.
Not from the audience.
Yeah.
And that's the only reliable way to get at the evidence. And that's the way physics is done. You can't write a scientific paper in which you say, eyewitnesses said this or that. It doesn't hold water in science. You have to use instruments. So this is the approach I'm taking, using cameras, using microphones, using
right.
passive radar system. And John Mack was just speaking with people. Now, that, of course, is somewhat subjective, and as a result, the university argued that, it's just people telling him stories, and
right.
That reduces the credibility of the institution or something like that.
I'll tell you what, Dr. Loeb, I'll interject here in a moment. We're talking with Dr. Avi Loeb. We're going to get into his new book, Interstellar, which asks the question, what happens on day 2 after an extraterrestrial civilization may have been confirmed? The last time we had a chance to speak with Dr. Avi Loeb, the topic was Oumuamua, this cigar-shaped object way, way out there that was first confirmed interstellar visitor. It wasn't just a rock, Dr. Loeb contended. It's an artifact from an ET civilization. That astonishing declaration kicked off an intense debate that continues to this day, and it also ignited tremendous interest among the general public. Dr. Loeb's new book, Interstellar, expands the conversation. He makes the argument that investigating, learning about possible ET civilizations is essential to human survival. We're going to get into that part of the discussion next. Dr. Loeb, I have to tell you, what I'm most excited about your new book, Interstellar, is that it is so hopeful. It's positive. There's a sense of excitement in this book. It's like a message. Let's go learn about this. Let's dig into it. Let's find out our true place in the cosmos, our position in the universal pecking order. Find out, are we alone? Do you set out to purposely make it kind of a hopeful, positive message?
Yeah, I think one of the things I learned about life is that it's often a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's better to be an optimist. If I would think that I will not find anything in the Pacific Ocean, I would not go there and I wouldn't find anything. So it's much better to be positive because every now and then your wishes come true. And, there is a book, a famous book by Steven Weinberg, the physicist who won the Nobel Prize, called The First 3 Minutes. And towards the end of it, he says, the more we comprehend the universe, the more pointless it seems. And that's a depressing thought. The universe is pointless. And I thought about it, and I realized that he's completely wrong. The reason he finds the universe pointless, and by the way, it's not only him, but it's all my colleagues that work on studying the universe, is because they focus on lifeless objects, elementary particles, radiation, things that have no life. And we know from our own life that finding a partner brings a meaning to your life. And loneliness is pointless. And so my advice is let's search for a partner out there, for a neighbor, because that will change our perspective. Suddenly the universe would appear to be meaningful. And, that is a very basic perspective that could change the future of humanity, because if we find a partner, a neighbor that is more accomplished than we are, we could learn something new that we haven't yet learned in the last century of science and technology. They could inspire us to go into space. And at the very least, I can imagine that, it would convince us that what we are doing now makes no sense. I mean, we are engaged in conflicts. $2 trillion a year is going to military budgets worldwide. And just, think about using this money for space exploration. I calculated that we could reach every star in the Milky Way galaxy by sending probes within 1 century. Billions of probes with this budget in 1 century will go towards every star. So it's just a matter of priorities. And perhaps if we realize that we have a neighbor out there and they reached our doorstep before we reached their doorstep, that would convince us to work together, because we are all in the same boat, Earth, sailing through space. And when I was in the Pacific Ocean, I realized, all the team members were working together selflessly towards the success of the mission. That's the kind of attitude that I'm really hoping for. If there will be this wake-up call coming from a neighbor that will change the priorities of humanity, make us all work together as equal members of the human species.
This expedition you made out into the Pacific sounds like just a rollicking grand adventure. Could you share with our audience why you picked that spot, what you were looking for, and what you found?
Yeah, so the story starts on January 8th, 2014, when U.S. government satellites detected a fireball from the collision of an object with Earth. And that's called a meteor, when an object collides with Earth and burns up in the atmosphere as a result of friction with air. What was unusual about this one is that the object was moving very fast. It actually came from behind the Earth in its orbit around the sun. And even though it came from behind the Earth, it was moving at 45 kilometers per second, faster than Earth, relative to Earth itself. And we calculated in 2019, January 2019, when that was exactly 5 years after this object was found by the U.S. government, it was just put in a catalog of NASA. And I was interviewed about another meteor that landed near Kamchatka, and it's called the Kamchatka meteor. just a couple of weeks earlier. So the radio interviewer wanted to ask questions about that, and I looked at the online and found this catalog of NASA. And I asked my student to check if any of the objects, the fastest objects, might have originated from outside the solar system, because I was already intrigued by Oumuamua, that looked unlike any rock that we are familiar with in the solar system. And so I said, why don't we find if there is any meteor that came from outside the solar system? And we found this one. And then submitted the paper for publication, and the referees, my colleagues, rejected it. They said, we don't believe the U.S. government. So at the time, I was chair of the board on physics and astronomy of the National Academies, and I complained about it to my colleagues there. I said, look, I mean, this is data that, you know, the U.S. Space Command is getting more funding than NASA, and we should trust their data, because, they are supposed to alert the U.S. president if a ballistic missile is coming from North Korea. And if they make mistakes, they will say, no, it's going to Mexico while it's heading towards Washington. So it's, they know what they're talking about. Anyway, so as a result of me frustrated, one of the people behind the national security fence suggested to help. And it ended up with a person from the White House reaching to the U.S. Space Command, and there was a letter issued by the U.S. Space Command in March 2022, 3 years later, saying that they confirm, after looking at the data again, they confirm that it's of interstellar origin. This meteor came from outside the solar system. And they do it at a 99.99% confidence. That was a letter sent to NASA. The Department of Defense basically came to my defense on this matter, and our paper was accepted for publication at that point. And the government also released the data about the fireball, the light curve from this meteor. And that allowed us to conclude two things. Well, first of all, it came with a very high speed already outside the solar system, faster than 95% of the stars in the vicinity of the sun, relative to the local frame of the Milky Way galaxy. So that's unusual, faster than 95% of the stars near the sun. And moreover, it exploded only in the lower atmosphere, where the stress on the object was far greater than on all other space rocks that we had seen as meteors, 272 of them in the NASA catalog over the past decade. So the object was unusually tough, material strength larger than even iron meteorites, which make up 5% of the meteors. So, if that raised the possibility that it may be a Voyager-like meteor. Just imagine our own spacecraft, Voyager, going to interstellar space and eventually colliding with a planet like the Earth. It would appear as a meteor in the sky of that planet that is of unusual material strength because it's made of stainless steel, and unusual speed because it was propelled by a rocket. And so I decided to go to the site of the meteor and find what it was made of. And that was a big challenge. There were many failure points. First, we had to get $1.5 million to fund the expedition, and gladly Charles Hoskinson, the funder, contacted me out of the blue, and we had a Zoom call, and he said, you have the money. And then organizing a team of 28 people, the best in the world, by the way, and that was, again, a very fortunate circumstance that those people agreed and joined, and actually many of them volunteered to join us. And then we built a sled with magnets on both sides that is 1 meter wide and 200 kilograms in mass. And we placed it on the ocean floor, connected with a cable to the ship that was fittingly called the Silver Star. And we basically dragged the sled back and forth, just like mowing the lawn, across a region that is 7 miles in size, and the ocean is more than a mile deep. And what we were looking for are the molten droplets from the surface of the object when it was exposed to the fireball, the immense heat that surrounded it. And those droplets were supposed to be a millimeter or less in size. That's the size of a grain of sand. So just think about it, searching for grains of sand at the bottom of the ocean, a mile deep, across a region of 7 miles in length. And so many of my colleagues obviously said, you will find nothing, it's a waste of time, And I said, why don't you sit back and relax? I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm doing the heavy lifting. And if I come back with nothing, you can say that's what I expected. So we went there, and after 6 days, at first the sled was not lying on the ocean floor because the cable was lifting it. It was kiting. And the exceptional engineers that we had on the ship realized that we need to go with a current in order to keep it on the floor. But then we started collecting materials, and most of it was volcanic ash. This is black powder from volcanic activity. And after the 6th day, I wrote 43 diary reports altogether. And after the 6th day, I wrote an essay on medium.com. All of them were published, by the way, and there were millions of people around the world who read those reports. They were very excited. And they were translated to Spanish. And on the 6th day, I wrote a report with the title, Where Are the Spherules? These are the molten droplets. We didn't find them yet. And I was straightforward. We didn't find them. And then the following day, we started filtering the black powder. The particles that are small, we let them out with a mesh that had the size of a quarter of a millimeter. And then we started looking at the big particles through a microscope. And lo and behold, we found a spherule. It looked very distinct from the background sand. It was like a metallic marble. And I basically hugged the person who found it first on the microscope. And I was so thrilled because I knew that if you find an ant in the kitchen, there must be many more out there. And then we found 50 of them during the expedition that lasted 2 weeks, between June 14th to 28th, 2023. And when we came back to Harvard, I shipped the materials by FedEx. It arrived a few days later to my home. I realized that a few days of a delay is not a big deal because this material took billions of years to arrive to us from far away. And then I brought it to a laboratory of Stein Jacobson at Harvard that has the best mass spectrometer in the world to analyze the composition of the spherules. And we found that there is an excess of spherules along the meteor path. We made a map. My postdoc, Laura Domini, made that map, and we saw concentration of excess of spherules along the path. And, of course, there were some background spherules in control regions and also in the area of the meteor. But on top of that, there was an excess. And then we found a special type of spherules that were along the meteor path in those regions of excess. And that the composition of that was never seen before in the scientific literature. It's materials that have a very different abundance of elements than in the solar system. Elements like lanthanum, uranium, beryllium are hundreds of times more abundant in those spherules, and that was never seen anywhere. And so we reported the results, the findings, and now, so far we analyzed only about a tenth of the spherules we have. When we came back to Harvard, my summer intern found 600 more in addition to the 50 we had on the ship. And so altogether we have about 700 right now. So we analyzed 57 and we are now in the process of analyzing many more. And it's just, an amazing story of discovery, taking risks despite all odds and being successful. And, there were so many points of failure that every team member was essential for the success of this mission. And we will go again because for now we can just say it came from outside the solar system, but to be able to tell if it's natural, if it was a rock that came from an unusual environment different than the solar system, or it was a technological gadget. Maybe we found the element of semiconductors there. We need to find bigger pieces.
Well, it's such a great scientific adventure story. I mean, it's something worthy of Jules Verne. It should be a movie. I hope you had cameras along the way. We're going to have to go to a break here now. I want you to tell us that story on the other side. Got to go to a break. Talking with Dr. Avi Loeb about this amazing expedition that it was completed and what's coming next. It's a great adventure story. Much more to come here on Coast to Coast.